Hi, I'm Tessa from Brainrot News, here with a few bits of economic despair, policy malpractice, and neoliberal rot for you to choke on. On today's menu, we're taking a guided tour through America's economic graveyard, from the birth of capitalism to its current zombified form, wheezing under Trump's second term. We'll look at how the system has always been broken, why every recession is less of a surprise and more of a scheduled demolition, and why 2025 might just be the year it finally collapses for real this time.
Brainrot the news.
Part 1. Collapsing, capitalism's favorite hobby. Economic crises in the United States are not flukes or freak accidents, black swan events, the result of bad luck, rogue bureaucrats, or Uranus being in Gatorade. No, these collapses, recessions, depressions, panics, and corrections are as American as mass shootings and student debt. They are baked into the crust of capitalism like rat poison in an apple pie. Every few years, the economy has a meltdown, flops on the floor, and starts seizing uncontrollably while billionaires argue over who gets to buy the ambulances. That's not poor governance, that's the design. Capitalism is a system engineered for endless accumulation. Extract labor, suppress wages, cut costs, and chase returns like a coked up dog chasing Teslas. The result is a cycle of overproduction, underconsumption, and speculative financial detonation that inevitably blows up in our faces again and again and again. Mainstream economists, bless their dumb little hearts, like to pretend this is not a pattern. They show up after every collapse with the same shocked expression you'd expect from someone finding out their toaster doesn't double as a bathtub. No one could have predicted this, they say, as if the entire 19th and 20th centuries weren't just a series of increasingly absurd economic implosions punctuated by mass unemployment, war profiteering, and child labor. The polite fiction is that the market is rational until it slams a bottle of Everclear and crashes through the windshield of reality. These crises don't emerge from nowhere. They are expressions of the class struggle at the heart of the system. The rich hoarding more than they can ever use, the poor working more than they can ever be paid for, and everyone else clinging to the myth that one day, if they hustle hard enough, they'll have enough money to be comfortable. They won't. What's worse, every time the system fails, it doubles down. Capital gets bailed out, labor gets kicked in the teeth, and inequality spreads all over like mold in a flooded basement. If you are wondering why we never learned from the past, it's because the people writing the history books are too busy counting their dividends. In this episode, we'll be digging through the wreckage of American capitalism's greatest hits, the speculative frenzies, the mass bankruptcies, the bailouts, and the breadlines. From the panic of 1837 to the crash of 1929, from stagflation in the 70s to the meltdown of 2008, all the way to the slow-motion economic nightmare we're living through right now. Hopefully, 2025 might just be the year we stop calling it a recession and start calling it what it really is, a managed demolition of the working class. Part 2. America learns to break itself for profit. The 19th century, a time of manifest destiny, child labor, and the government giving away millions of acres to railroad barons like Oprah giving away cars. This is where American capitalism really started to show its true colors, blood red and gold. While the storybooks remember it as a time of growth and innovation, the fine print reveals an era punctuated by economic implosions so frequent you'd think they were part of the plan, because they were. Even in its larval stage, American capitalism was running on the same fumes it still runs on today. Unregulated speculation, cheap labor, debt bubbles, and the belief that if it's big and shiny enough, it cannot possibly go wrong. Predictably, it did go wrong, repeatedly. The panic of 1797 to 1798 was capitalism's first real test drive, and it immediately wrapped the economy around a tree, fueled by credit expansion and a wild speculative spree in real estate and infrastructure. The bubble burst and sent the young republic staggering into recession. America had barely gotten out of its powdered wigs before discovering that its shiny new financial system was built on IOUs and delusions. Then came 1819, America's first big boy depression. It hit so hard it left skid marks on the Constitution. Fueled by overzealous land speculation and a government-backed central bank trying not to destroy everything for once, the panic of 1819 revealed the truth. This country's economy was a powder keg, and the spark was always money. By 1857, the US economy was a lot like a toddler juggling chainsaws. The sudden collapse of the Ohio life insurance insurance and trust company, kicked off another round of panic, worsened by collapsing grain prices thanks to the end of the Crimean War and the telegraph, which helped spread financial doom faster than ever. It was our first viral panic, a trend that would continue well into the modern day. Then there's the Panic of 1873, known as the Long Depression, a financial hangover that lasted nearly a quarter of a century. This one was turbocharged by more reckless railroad speculation, another banking collapse, and a deeply stupid monetary policy decision known as the Coinage Act of 1873, which effectively told silver to go sit in the corner and shut up. What followed was an extremely brutal deflationary spiral. Between 1873 and 1875 alone, over 18,000 businesses went belly up. Railroads failed, banks collapsed, unemployment soared, prices dropped by 30%, and people got pissed. The working class started rioting, understandably, culminating in the Great Railroad Strike of 1877, where laborers demanded not just better wages, but a basic right to exist without being run over by a corporate juggernaut in a top hat. The government's response was President Grant kissing Wall Street's gold ring and telling workers to eat deflation. Even reformers failed miserably. The People's Party in Chicago, theoretically the voice of the working class, refused to provide even basic relief, because even when the system pretends to be on your side, it still works for the landlords. Then came the Panic of 1893, a 4-year economic faceplant so bad it made the Great Depression look like a practice round. This one had everything: a collapsing railroad bubble, agricultural collapse, drought, a depleted gold reserve thanks to the Sherman Silver Purchase Act, and for fun, an Argentine crop failure just to prove that global capitalism is a lot like herpes. What happens in one part of the world always comes back to bite everyone else. The result was the failure of over 500 banks, 15,000 businesses going under, the stock market taking a swan dive into hell, unemployment shooting up to an estimated 25%, and labor unrest spreading like wildfire. The Pullman Strike of 1894 saw the federal government roll out the troops to protect corporate profits from the people whose labor actually made them. A stark reminder that freedom, in practice, often means protecting capital with bayonets. President Grover Cleveland responded with all the moral clarity of a discount monopoly banker. He defended the gold standard, repealed the Sherman Act, and let Americans starve rather than dare offend the delicate sensibilities of financial capital. All of this wasn't an accident. It was the system doing what it was built to do. These weren't temporary hiccups or poor policy decisions. They were inevitable outcomes of a structure that values profits over people, speculation over stability, and banks over the basic needs of the population. The 19th century was just the dress rehearsal. The 20th would be the full production with more banks, more bubbles, and way more blood. Part 3. Capitalism coughs up a lung. If the 19th century was capitalism tripping over its shoelaces, the Great Depression was it falling face first into a wood chipper and blaming the peasants for not catching it. Between 1929 and 1941, the United States witnessed a collapse so massive that it stopped pretending this whole invisible hand thing was working. Instead, the invisible hand turned out to be holding a blackjack and demanding rent. The seeds of disaster were sown in the Roaring '20s. While the rich spent weekends inventing polo injuries and dancing on tables, the working class was scraping together change under them. By 1929, the top 1% of Americans held over half the nation's wealth. We all know a healthy economy is a society where a yacht salesman has a waiting list and the rest of the country is eating shoe leather. Enter the stock market, the nation's favorite casino, with worse odds and fewer ethics. The 1920s market was a drunken orgy of speculation, margin buying, and industrialists convincing the public that stock prices only go up right before gravity reminded everyone how cliffs work. The October 1929 crash didn't just wreck the economy, it crashed it into a gas station, and because capitalism doesn't believe its seatbelts, the whole country got ejected through the windshield right into the fire. Banks started collapsing like they were in a trust fall with a ghost. Americans, panicked and broke, lined up to withdraw what little they had, only to discover their money had long since been reincarnated as a railroad stock or a hotel in a state far from them. The Federal Reserve, in a masterclass of how to do everything wrong, responded by shrinking the money supply like they were trying to win a prize for worst possible outcome. The gold standard was just a golden acre tied to the drowning economy, preventing monetary flexibility and exporting financial contagion around the globe like a gift basket full of despair. If that all wasn't enough, Congress decided to make things worse by passing the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act in 1930, a bill that was essentially protectionism on bath salts. Check out our history of tariffs in the United States for more information on how that went, but to sum it up, it raised tariffs on over 20,000 imported goods and kicked off a global tit-for-tat that cratered international trade faster than you can say hoard the canned beans. Instead of lifting American industry, it suffocated it in a global economic chokehold. The human cost was catastrophic. By 1933, unemployment hit 25%. That's not a job market, that's an extinction event. People lost homes, entire towns vanished into economic dust, and the breadline stretched longer than the list of failed banks. Suicide rates climbed, malnutrition spread, families disintegrated, and people rode the rails, wandering and hoping to find a better place, like medieval pilgrims. Except there was no salvation, just more soup kitchens and shattered dreams. Out of this bleakness rose movements of the desperate and furious, such as the Unemployed Citizens League and the Washington Commonwealth Federation, advocating for radical changes, as well as the Bonus Army, World War I veterans marching on Washington just to get the money they were promised. Hoover responded by sending in tanks, because politicians are allergic to accountability. Politically, the crisis shattered the illusion that markets would self-correct if you just prayed hard enough and sacrificed enough union organizers. FDR rode the wave of misery into the White House, and with him came the New Deal, a sprawling alphabet soup of relief, recovery, and reform. It was a lifeline tossed to a drowning nation, but make no mistake, it was also an attempt to rescue capitalism from its own suicidal tendencies. The CCC, WPA, and PWA gave millions jobs, putting people to work building roads, parks, and other public infrastructure, the kind of stuff Wall Street doesn't touch normally. The Social Security Act offered the first real social safety net, and the Wagner Act gave workers the right to unionize and collectively bargain. So naturally, business leaders screamed about Stalin at dinner parties. Unfortunately, the New Deal was not a revolution. It was a patch job, a stitch-up on a system that had already shown itself to be morally and structurally bankrupt. The programs were often racist, sexist, and exclusionary. Domestic workers who were disproportionately black and female were left out of key protections. Relief was administered unevenly, and many of the most progressive demands like wealth redistribution or a guaranteed right to housing were left to rot in legislative purgatory. In the end, what actually dragged the US out of the Depression wasn't the New Deal, it was World War II, a global bloodbath that spurred enough government spending to jumpstart the economy with tanks, bombs, and mass conscription. Nothing like a little planetary conflict to get the GDP up. Even the Washington Commonwealth Federation, one of the few voices of reason at the time, warned that the New Deal was only a bandage on a gaping wound. It did not redistribute power or change the rules of the game. It just made the cage a bit more comfortable. So while the Great Depression forced a temporary reckoning with capitalism's ugliest impulses, the real lesson it taught the ruling class was that if the system breaks badly enough, they can throw people a few crumbs, but never let them touch the pie. Because the pie belongs to the bankers, the brokers, and the men who turn recessions into opportunities to buy the dip. Part 4. The Long, Slow Con. Post-war America was a brief, shining moment where capitalism wore a mask of stability and everyone pretended the engine wasn't leaking oil. From 1945 to 2007, the United States economy played out like a roller coaster designed by a drunk architect. Booming highs, sudden drops, and the occasional derailment into a recessionary ditch. The official line was that these were just the natural rhythms of the market asserting themselves, like a weather pattern no one could control, even though the same 6 rich guys owned the forecast. The first dip came right after World War II ended in 1945. Wartime production halted, government spending nosedived, and the military-industrial complex hadn't quite perfected its now eternal drip feed of forever wars. Capitalism, like a hydra with a degree in advertising, had bounced back until 1949, when post-war consumer euphoria wore off and people realized they couldn't actually afford all the refrigerators and Buicks they were promised in the brochures. Then came the 1953 recession, brought on by the end of the Korean War and a sudden drop in defense spending. It's almost like capitalism throws a tantrum every time peace breaks out. Weird. Add in the 1957 and 58 recession, which hit during the Asian flu pandemic, and a Fed-induced monetary chokehold, and you've got yourself a solid pattern. Each downturn blamed on something new, but all sharing a core feature of an economy that breaks itself just as often as it sustains itself. By the 1970s, the system was creaking under the weight of its own contradictions. The 1973 to 75 recession was triggered by the OPEC oil embargo embargo, and suddenly, Americans discovered that their way of life was built on foreign oil, plastic everything, and the naive belief that the planet had infinite patience. Inflation spiked and growth stalled. Enter a new villain, stagflation, a terrifying hybrid of economic stagnation and inflation, proving that capitalism doesn't just fail, it gets creative about it. Then came the 1980s, where things got weird. The Fed, led by Paul Volcker, decided to cure inflation by basically strangling the economy. Interest rates were hiked to record highs. Small businesses collapsed like Jenga towers in a wind tunnel, and a double-dip recession followed. 1980, then a deeper nosedive in 1981 to 82. Reagan rode this economic uncertainty to power and told the American public that the problem wasn't greed or deregulated banks. It was the government, the same government that had saved capitalism in the 30s, won World War II, built highways, and funded the moon landing, was now the enemy. Thus began the era of neoliberalism, a new cult dressed in a pinstripe suit, selling snake oil labeled as efficiency. This was not just economics, it was a religion. The holy commandments were to deregulate, privatize, cut taxes for the rich, crush unions, and tell the poorer people that it's their fault that they are poor. Neoliberalism emerged like a vulture in the late 70s, perched on the carcass of Keynesian economics, promising that if we just let the rich do whatever they want, the blessings would trickle down like piss in a shower drain. Instead, the only thing that trickled down was despair. Reagan and Thatcher led the charge, slashing social spending, gutting public institutions, and transforming the economy into a casino for the elite, while everyone else was handed scratch-off tickets and told to dream big. The deregulation of the financial sector tore up the New Deal era rulebook that had kept Wall Street on a short leash. Suddenly, banks could gamble with your mortgage, companies could buy themselves with debt, and entire industries were built on vapor. Labor unions were defanged, wages stagnated, CEOs started making 300 times what their employees earned, and everyone pretended that it was meritocracy, not legalized looting. The 1990s brought globalization on steroids, with increased outsourcing, the gutting of American manufacturing, and NAFTA, because as it turns out, optimizing profits abroad pairs beautifully with redirecting the ensuing economy anxieties towards immigrants at home. Then came the dot-com bubble, the 2001 recession that hit when investors realized that maybe Pets.com didn't need $1 million advertising budget to lose money. Instead of reining things in, Wall Street doubled down and financialization exploded. The economy wasn't about making things anymore, it was about making bets on bets on bets. All of this laid the groundwork for the Great Recession of 2007 to 2009. But we'll save that collapse for later. What matters here is that between 1945 and 2007, every recession, every crash, every boom and bust did not prove capitalism was resilient. It proved it was sick, a system addicted to growth, allergic to regulation, and engineered to funnel wealth upward while telling the rest of us it's our fault we can't afford a dentist. Neoliberalism did not just fail to fix capitalism's problems, it was the same problem repackaged as opportunity and sold like a magic pill that only made the disease worse. And by the time the next collapse came, the system was so hollowed out it couldn't even pretend to be surprised. Part 5. The Unfulfilled Reckoning. By 2007, the American economy was basically a Jenga tower made of credit cards, student loans, and lies, held together with mortgage-backed duct tape and the delusion that housing prices could only go up. The Great Recession was not a surprise. It was a controlled demolition carried out by Wall Street with a smirk and a spreadsheet. Neoliberalism had spent the previous 3 decades smashing every financial regulation like a rock star in a hotel room. The 1999 repeal of the Glass-Steagall Act was the economic equivalent of giving a toddler a flamethrower. It removed the wall between your neighborhood bank and the cocaine-fueled hedge fund casino downtown, resulting in the financial innovation of the 2000s, which turned subprime mortgages into investment-grade confetti and bundled them into alphabet soup. MBSs, CDOs, and CDSs, complex, incomprehensible acronyms designed to hide the fact that the entire system was a pyramid scheme wearing a Brooks Brothers suit. Predatory lenders descended on poor and working-class communities like vultures and Gucci loafers, handing out adjustable rate mortgages to people who did not understand what a FICO score was, and Wall Street gobbled it up. They were not just gambling with your house, they were betting on your failure, insuring those bad bets with credit default swaps, then selling the same flaming junk to pension funds with a straight face. It was not just deregulation, it was a purposeful deconstruction, a campaign to dismantle public accountability and rebuild the economy as a high-stakes game of musical chairs, where the rich always had a seat and the poor got got blamed for tripping. When the music stopped in 2008, the entire global financial system collapsed. But instead of handcuffs, the bankers got bonuses. Over 8.7 million Americans lost their jobs. Foreclosures swept the country like a biblical plague. Retirement accounts evaporated. Entire communities were gutted. Black and brown homeowners who were disproportionately targeted by predatory lenders lost generations of wealth in a blink. The same bankers who crashed the system got bailed out faster than you can say too big to fail. The government's response was a great example of Stockholm Syndrome. First came TARP, the Troubled Asset Relief Program, which shoveled billions of dollars into the very institutions that detonated the economy, because apparently, if they go down, we all do. Then came the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, a stimulus package that was too small, too cautious, and way too late. Imagine patching the Titanic with duct tape and then calling it bold leadership. What we got was not justice. It was trickle-down triage. The banks were saved, the rich got richer, and regular people were handed a foreclosure notice and a job at Amazon. The architects of the crisis, high-frequency trading sociopaths and corner offices, faced zero accountability. No perp walks, no clawbacks, just golden parachutes and board seats. The social fallout was volcanic. The Tea Party exploded onto the scene, angry, white, and sponsored by the Koch brothers. They blamed the government, immigrants, and Obama's tan suit, all while defending the same market forces that screwed them. Meanwhile, on the left, something else stirred. Occupy Wall Street emerged, angrier, younger, and a whole lot more honest. "We are the 99% was not just a slogan. It was a primal scream against a system that rewarded greed and punished everyone else. While Occupy raised consciousness, the state raised batons. Encampments were crushed, protesters were kettled, and the media moved on quickly, because nothing terrifies the powerful more than the powerless realizing they have something in common no matter what side of the political spectrum they support. In the end, the Great Recession was not just a crash. It was a crossroads, and the country chose the same damn road it was already on, only now with fewer jobs, more debt, and a bigger wealth gap than ever before. The recovery was a myth for most. The stock market rebounded, but that's not the economy. That's a scoreboard for rich people. We could have reined in Wall Street, restructured the housing system, or reimagined capitalism itself. Instead, we handed out bailouts, blamed the victims, and called it mourning in America. The reckoning never came, just austerity, anxiety, and a growing sense that maybe, just maybe, the system is working exactly as it was designed. Part 6. The Cost of American Delusion. Now, we are currently in the year 2025, where the economy's latest trick is disappearing growth, dying confidence, and handling loaded economic guns called tariff policy. The gross domestic product just shrank 0.3% in Q1. While some still cling to the term soft landing, the more accurate term is a controlled nosedive into a dumpster fire. On paper, unemployment is still a respectable 4.2%, until you realize that most of those employed are either delivering groceries for 3 different apps, working 60 hours a week for the Walton family, or quietly praying they go unnoticed by the Department of Government Efficiency, which is currently laying off federal workers to save money on staplers, I guess. Long-term unemployment is quietly ticking up, and job growth is expected to slow because, shocker, you cannot grow an economy when your main export is economic uncertainty. For now, inflation's chilling at 2.4%, but do not get too cozy. Thanks to Trump's tariff tantrums, prices are about to spike harder than the blood pressure of a Fed chairman. New levies on everything from Chinese microchips to Canadian lumber mean we are now paying more for less, all in the name of bringing jobs back, which so far has mostly meant bringing back Reagan-era talking points and 1930s-style economic risk. Consumer confidence is dead face down in the shallow end of a kiddie pool with a boot planted firmly on its neck, at the lowest it's been since people were hoarding toilet paper in 2020. The leading economic index is heading south, waving a tiny white flag as it passes, and even JP Morgan, whose job is literally to stay upbeat while robbing you, says there's a 60% chance of recession in 2025. They are not just predicting a downturn, they are signaling their position. The top 20% are hosting rooftop parties with robot waiters, while the bottom 20 are wondering whether to pay rent or eat this week. This is less of a wealth gap and more of a yawning, Lovecraftian abyss where hope goes to die. Trump's tariff sledgehammer is choking international trade. Elon Musk's Doge is trimming the federal workforce like it's pruning a corpse. collapse. Consumer confidence is in free fall. The global economy is shaky at best, and America's policy compass is currently spinning like it's been possessed. Some analysts think this is not incompetence. It is the plan. If you see the government as the enemy, what better way to destroy it than to sabotage the economy and then scream, "See, it's broken." Trump's economic strategy looks suspiciously like accelerated collapse with patriotic branding. See our episodes on Project 2025 and Curtis Yarvin for more analysis on what that might look like. So, are we headed for a depression? We are not in 1932 territory, but the pieces are on the board. A fragile global economy, high inequality, political extremism, and an administration that seems more interested in setting fires than putting them out. History teaches us that depressions do not arrive overnight. They sneak in after a string of bad decisions, ignored warnings, and leaders who mistake hubris for strategy. And we are clearly running out of time to course correct. Part 7. The collapse will not be televised. It will be live streamed. If the United States slips from recession into a full-blown depression in 2025, the consequences will not just be statistics. They will be millions of stories of lost homes, empty refrigerators, and vanished futures. The working class, as always, will be the first to bleed and the last to be saved. Mass layoffs will sweep across industries like an economic hurricane, and the already fraying safety nets, threadbare holdovers from a time where we pretended to care, will snap under the weight of suffering. Breadlines will return, only this time they'll stretch past Tesla charging stations and under LED billboards flashing crypto ads and pharmaceutical jingles. Poverty will not just rise, it will explode, taking with it housing stability, access to healthcare, and what is left of public trust. Mental health will see a sharp downturn. In the age of hustle culture and declining wages, we have already normalized burnout and despair, but this would rip the emotional seams wide open. Depression, suicide, and addiction won't just be public health challenges. They will be everyday facts of life. The human cost will be incalculable. People do not riot because they are angry. They riot because they are desperate, and desperation is already here. The political system, already cracking under the strain of authoritarian drift and partisan rot, would lurch into chaos. Movements both left and right will explode. Some will demand justice, others will demand blood. And as always, those most at risk, like people of color, people with disabilities, and queer folks, will face the most vicious fallout from a system built to discard them first. But it will not stop at America's shores. A depression here would trigger a shockwave. Trade will collapse, markets will shudder, and global supply chains already on life support will flatline. Developing nations tied to the US economy by the iron chains of IMF debt and imperial dependency will suffer the most. Capital will flee, currencies will collapse, and governments will fall. Nationalism, fascism, and violence will fill the void. The last time we let this flavor of capitalism collapse unchecked, we got World War II. The next time, who knows? A new Cold War, a fractured, multipolar world where authoritarian blocs rise and democracy drowns in a sea of fire, or just more managed decline, more slow suffering, more gaslighting austerity repackaged as resilience. That is the final cruelty of capitalism. It fails again and again, and we're always the ones expected to endure it, to tighten our belts, to work harder, to smile through the collapse. We know how this story ends unless we write a new one. A depression is not just an economic event, it is a moral failure. It is a system saying, yet again, that profits matter more than people, that billionaires must be protected while children go hungry, that the engine of history must keep turning even if it grinds our bones to do it. So as 2025 lurches forward, remember, it does not have to end this way. But if it does, if the worst comes to pass, it won't be because we could not stop it. It will be because the people in power did not want to, and maybe this time we will not forgive them for it. That's all from Brainrot News. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe before YouTube commentary is classified as unprotected labor and met with federal troops.